Welcome to They Live by Film. I'm Adam Lundy. You don't see me on the YouTube channel very often. I haven't made a video in a little while, but this man here on screen definitely coaxed me to come back on. I'm joined by Ryan Verrill from The Disconnected. He's been a friend of the podcast for a long, long time. Chris and Zach have been a guest on his YouTube channel, so I thought high time for me to show up here, I guess. My glasses are getting all foggy, so I'm going to take them off for now. We're kind of doing an interesting experiment with this. So this is actually the first part of a kind of a two-part video. Part one is going to be here on this channel. Part two is going to be over on Ryan's channel, which of course you'll find all the links for in our description. And then I'm also going to put it all together on the podcast. So, if you found yourself here, if you're a normal podcast listener and want to just listen to it when you're driving to work or whatever, you will have access to that as well. But basically, what me and Ryan kind of decided to do a few weeks ago, well, a few months ago, I suppose, at this stage, it's been planned for a while. What we basically decided to do was just to pick a couple of movies. We didn't really have anything in particular in mind. We just kind of started talking about what we have and haven't seen. And, a couple of stuff came up. And we essentially settled on watching a couple of South Korean movies that you can probably put into the horror / apocalypse genre. Maybe the one that we're going to talk about over on Ryan's channel is maybe calling it a horror might be a little bit of a stretch, but you'll hear a bit more about that over there. But the one that we're going to talk about today in this video, definitely a horror film, and it is the film Train to Busan, which came out in 2016 from a director, which I'll mispronounce, Hyung Sang-ho, I believe, is the pronunciation. I'm pulling a Zach Bryant there with not knowing how to pronounce names. So we're going to talk about this film on this video, and the other film that we're going to talk about over on Ryan's channel is the Bong Joon-ho film The Host, which, if I remember correctly, came out in 2006, so 10 years earlier than Train to Busan. So if you're interested in hearing our thoughts on The Host, definitely skip over to The Disconnected and you'll hear us talk about that. But for now, Train to Busan, I suppose, again, this is kind of how we do things on the podcast, Ryan. So if you're cool doing it this way, I always like to just jump in and just, what's your knee-jerk thoughts, really brief, after watching this film?
Sure. First off, I think this is easily the best modern zombie movie, and I say modern fairly liberally, going back to probably around 2005. Everything for the good 20 years before that, I'd say, would be a different era. I think this is probably the best thing we have post maybe 28 Days Later. At least that jumps to mind. I can't think of anything else that I would put up there with this level of quality. My biggest knee-jerk things with this is I love the acting in this. There's not a single performance that I really doubt as less than earnest in any way. And then the other big thing is that we focus on the people in this film so much that you're connected to this wide spectrum of characters, and they take you through each of these stories, and you just can't help but care. And especially with our main character, the character developments that they bring up within him, it's just a hell of a ride from start to finish, pardon the pun with the train, but it's so well made that I'm eager to hear new people see this every single time I can talk about it with them.
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I was going to ask when you brought up 2005, what the watershed was. I suppose 28 Days Later is the kind of first, what we called fast zombies. Yep. They're not Romero zombies. They're not slow and sluggish and want brains. They are, fast, intense creatures. So right. Definitely fall into that category. And yeah, it's been a few years since I've seen 28 Days Later, but I love this film, and I don't remember loving 28 Days Later as much as I love watching this. This was my first time watching it. I don't remember if we said had you seen this film before, or was this your first time watching it?
No, and that's I was trying to go back to our conversation of what we had done to figure this out, and I couldn't quite remember it. But I think somehow we were trying to go one film that each of us had not seen, and somehow we landed on two films you hadn't seen and two films I had. I had seen Train to Busan once on Netflix when it got super popular. That was like the big intro to the States as it got released on Netflix. And once I saw that, I sought it out on physical media. I think it got a Wellgo USA Blu-ray. And I saw it one time on Blu-ray, and then just recently picked up the 4K, and I watched the 4K for this particular discussion.
Yeah, see, I'm not as up to date with my physicals with Train to Busan because I have the Studio Canal DVD that I bought. Literally, I probably bought it when it like first came out because I've had it for at least 5 or 6 years on my shelf, unopened, still in the shrink wrap. So has not been touched for whatever reason. Somebody recommended it to me when it first came out, probably around the same time it sort of went big in the States. Somebody recommended, say, hey, have you seen this film, Train to Busan? It's meant to be amazing. And I was like, no, I haven't seen it. I haven't even heard of it. I just popped onto Amazon, picked it up, and it stayed on my shelf through moving through two different houses. Bought it in one house, moved to another house, moved to this house, survived all the moving, untouched, unopened, and still has not been opened, as you noticed. They said still in the shrink wrap because I said I'm not going to watch it DVD, so I just rented it on Apple TV so I could watch it in good quality. So if there's any buyers out there for an unopened Studio Canal DVD of Train to Busan, to hit me up for that if that's your cup of tea. But back to the film. There's one thing that you mentioned that really resonated with me, and this is a film that gets all the emotional stuff perfect. The characters are so well developed, and like you said, there's so many characters, but they all have a role to play. They all have arcs. They all have they all go through individual things throughout the film. Obviously, the main character is the main focus, but even you have the character who's played by Dong Seok Ma, the sort of the stronger guy, who I recognize from Marvel's Eternals of all things. I think that's the only thing he's made outside of Korea. But yeah, he's one of the Eternals in that Marvel film. But the sort of arc that he goes through as this sort of kind of generic tough asshole, and he ends up being a huge sort of crutch for everybody else in the train. Obviously, his wife is a fantastic character as well. I suppose the only character that maybe is a little bit two dimensional is the sleazy businessman, because you can basically predict everything he's going to do throughout the entire film. But I suppose it's still fun to watch, though. You don't see his actions and kind of roll your eyes and think, "Oh, that's so obvious that they're doing this and that," because how it affects all the other characters, the ones that have those great arcs, is very important. And it really does just get the emotional beats right. We can talk about the technical filmmaking, for an hour, but what's really important when you have this kind of film is, if you want to be memorable, you have to do something a little bit different. And a lot of time with horror films, and I say this as a horror fan, you don't always get this emotionally attached to your characters that are being dispatched by murderous zombies. Whereas here you do. Like, if I compare it to, like, let's just compare this to Dawn of the Dead, where we have a very similar dynamic of characters brought together into a confined space. I don't care about those characters in Dawn of the Dead near as much as I cared about these characters. And that might be sacrilegious to some, because Dawn of the Dead to some is like peak zombie. Maybe it's sacrilegious for me to say that I thought Train to Busan was better than Dawn of the Dead. Zach Bryant will probably come and hunt me down for saying it, but I enjoyed it more. Maybe it's not as important a film as Dawn of the Dead, because Dawn of the Dead is Dawn of the Dead. It's one of the most important movies ever made, in that, especially in genre film. But I can walk away and say I enjoyed Train to Busan more than I enjoyed Dawn of the Dead, because I cared about the characters more. I just think the writing was just so good.
Yeah, I fully agree. And on the whole Dawn of the Dead conversation, I'll just add to the garbage heap, see if we're both going to get lit on fire here. Dawn of the Dead is my least favorite of the big three from Romero. I put Day of the Dead at the top of the heap, Night of the Living Dead in spot 2, and then Dawn of the Dead actually at the bottom. I think that Romero got better with writing his characters as it goes along, and Night of the Living Dead, I think, just has a better emotional core because it's so intimate, I guess, throughout most of the film compared to Dawn of the Dead. And I don't Day of the Dead, the dialogue just feels so important, and he really nailed it in that one. But Train to Busan kind of got that exactly right most of the film, and even Day of the Dead, I think, is plotting in a few different spots. The action here comes in the perfect moments in Train to Busan. It is paced in such a way that you don't get, I don't know, like action weary, but also you don't get
Mm.
bored or tired because you have these natural breaks that come in and separate it into these well thought out sort of segments in their film, and it all just makes sense as they're going through it.
Maybe I'm crazy here, and this has just come to me just as you're talking about it. Maybe I'm crazy in terms of how it was plotted, that it was plotted like a train journey. You plow on for
Yeah.
such and such amount of time, you come to your natural stop, then you plow on again. So I just thought I didn't come prepared for that. I just thought about it as you were talking. Maybe it's literally plotted like a train journey where you just go full steam, which is where we get some really just fantastic, really tense sequences. So, that whole sort
Yeah.
of, it takes up such a big chunk of the film now that I think about it, when they're trying to get from, that sort of cart up to the top where like everybody else is. And they have to go through kind of hordes of zombies each way and pick up the daughter and the wife characters along the way as well. Now that I think about it, it probably takes up a good like hour of the movie, but it's never boring at any point, even though it takes up such like
Right.
this kind of what would be a relatively small plot point, get from point A to point B, ends up taking up such a huge chunk, but is never boring because it's almost like every time they get to a different cart, they knew that they had to do something different. They couldn't just rinse and repeat. They have to get through like 5 or 6, train carts to get to where they need to go. And there was always something different a little bit along the way. There was the emotional aspect where the character, as part of the baseball team, where he meets his teammates who have turned into zombies, and he has to kind of wrestle with that. And then you have the part where they're going through the tunnel and they figure out that these guys don't do so well in the dark. So there's always these little changes in each section that really helps to just keep you engaged, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Yeah, and the way that they treat each horde of zombies that they face and each car along the way, it's funny because they, not only are they separated by like the baseball team, but they have these other mechanisms to solve getting through that cart. So it keeps you engaged because it's this ongoing thing. And I think that this is probably the best time to mention the biggest pop culture phenomenon in zombies over the last 20 years, which I think this is where The Walking Dead really faltered. Because a lot of the we're going to face the zombie horde is always the same. A lot of the ways that they had to solve things, it was the same type of thinking. Sure, you had a different villain come in with Negan or a prison warden or whatever, but it's not the same as on this train. I mean, even writing an hour and a half long movie, they could make these separate in such a way that you're like, oh wow, this is tough. How are they going to overcome this? This is completely different than the last one. Walking Dead never felt that way. It just felt like a completely different thing, which is why I think this is probably a much better zombie representation for pop culture over the last 20 years.
Yeah, it's strong. Like, it will probably say as much to The Walking Dead as it will to me, but I didn't even finish it. I got to like season 3 or 4, and it's like you
Same.
said, it just ends up being the same plot points over and over again, just a different sort of big bad at the end of it all. Whereas this is like, when you think about it, this is such a very basic sort of plot point. You are trapped somewhere with something and you need to escape from it. That's such a it's been used and recycled over and over again, whether it's, Hitchcock and Lifeboat, where they're trying to figure out who the saboteur is, or it's freaking Snakes on a Plane, where they're trapped on board. Like, it's a plot that's been recycled over and over again in different ways. But yet this film still feels fresh because, as far as I'm aware, and I can hold my hands up to say I'm not a huge zombies guy. They're not really my go-to subgenre within horror. I'm much more of a slasher person than zombies. But I can't think on the top of my head of another kind of, another kind of film that has a plot like this, where we're in obviously a lot of zombie films are about being sort of enclosed in one area, whether it's like the house in Night of the Living Dead, or the shopping mall in Dawn of the Living Dead or Dawn of the Dead. But I don't remember anything like moving. Is there a zombie movie where people are trapped on a cruise ship? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not too sure. The closest example I can think of is, I think it's like Wreck 3 or something, or maybe it's even the American
Yep.
remix, Quarantine 3. I think is on like starts on an airplane at least. I think it finishes in the airport. But I'm talking about something I haven't watched in 10 years, so I could be pulling that completely out of my ass. But I don't recall, I don't recall anything like Train to Busan, where it reinvents that concept of trapped in a moving vehicle with something, but this time it's zombies. Probably because you don't really think to do it, and they had to be creative with how they set this up. With making it basically like a speed scenario where they can't stop the train. They just have to plow on to get where they need to go. There's no stopping along the way apart from that, first stop where shit hits the fan. Yeah, it's just a really unique film, and it really grabbed me. And I'd be interested to see. I know that the filmmaker made another film kind of in this universe. I know that it's not. He doesn't call it a sequel because it doesn't follow the same characters. It doesn't follow the same events or anything like that. But I haven't seen it. Have you seen it? It's called Peninsula. It came out a few years ago.
Yeah, it's in my opinion a big step down, and I think it gives up a lot
Really?
of what
Wow.
this film got right. Yeah, I definitely
Okay.
wanted more from it. The funny thing that there is no mention of yet during this is that there's actually a sort of prequel to Train to Busan, which is not a full movie. I believe it was animated, and I need to look this up, and I
It
probably should have looked this
was.
up beforehand.
Well,
But I think it was called
it's
Soul
an
Station.
animated. Exactly, it's
Yeah,
included as a special feature on this. Probably as a special feature on yours as well. Yeah, it's called Soul Station. I should have watched it.
probably.
I regret not. Um,
I would honestly
yeah,
say
it's
that's
an
better than
animated short.
Peninsula.
Oh, okay. Wow, interesting. That's surprising to me because the direction in this film, it just seems like a guy who just knows what he's doing. This in complete control.
Yeah,
When it comes to tone, when it comes to character building, world building, shot composition. Because I suppose one other thing we haven't really mentioned, which is not something you see a lot in horror movies, is like this all takes place during the day. There's no
right.
nighttime scenes in this. There's no running from zombies in the dark or running from the monsters in the dark, whatever. Which is something that happens 99% of horror movies. It's going to take at least partially in the nighttime. That doesn't happen here. The closest we get is when they go through the tunnels. That's as
Yep.
close as we get to darkness in this movie. Once the actual plot kicks in. Even that is like such a unique and interesting creative choice from the writers and the filmmakers to decide we're going to try and like subvert so many different things and
Yeah.
not be it and not have it be like sometimes subversion for me can be a double-edged sword. Sometimes it can be like really cool, but other times it feels like a slap in the face to the audience. And this didn't feel like that at all. I didn't feel like when I came away from this movie that I was like hankering for a nighttime chase scene or something. It didn't bother me at all that this film took place all through the daytime. In fact, I didn't even really think about it until the film was over, and I'm like, hey, that was all pretty bright for a zombie horror movie. I saw everything perfectly.
Yeah.
Like even we watched a really shitty movie on the podcast recently, called Flesh of the Living Dead or something. It was by that guy Bruno Mattei. I don't know if you've ever talked to Chris about him. Chris
Yep.
loves this dude. He's basically this Italian hack master, and it was awful. But like again, we got a nighttime zombie scene, which is what I'd expect from a zombie movie. So, having a film like this, which is all during the day, no nighttime scary chase scenes, but that not being a problem, you don't come away wanting that. I feel like that's super cool, super unique, and a really bold, creative choice that worked in their favor.
Well, and even horror as a whole, you normally expect there to be more fear in the dark because there's more of the unknown. That's more. I mean, a lot of us that grew up with the whole Nickelodeon age of the '90s, there's literally a show called "Are You Afraid of the Dark?" because it's just such a common trope. It's something that when you think of horror movie,
Yep.
most of the time it's going to be hidden in the shadows. There's going to be something that is obscured, and in this movie, there's nothing. I mean, everything is on blast, everything is highlighted, everything is dangerous because if they see you, they're coming after you. And they treat it so well that, like you just said, you don't notice until the end. And the only thing that you're really sort of noticing is that there's tunnels so that they can plan on these coming up and they can move quickly during those moments. But all that did was add to the tension, which made it, in my opinion, so much better than leaving it in the nighttime where everything would have been obscured. It's not this slow moment in between, these crazy sudden flashes of action. It is tension building between the flashes of
Yeah,
action, and because of that, that's why the pace doesn't get pulled down to something that could have been just really terrible, to be honest.
absolutely. And I suppose now that I think about it, there's probably a logical reason, plot wise, why they didn't have any of it in the dark, because as we learn very early in the film, the zombies can't really see in the dark. So it would have been
Yep.
almost like a bird box scenario, if or those kind of films where you have to like be really quiet. What's the other one called? A Quiet Place, where they have to be really quiet. Yeah,
A
that makes
Quiet
sense.
Place, yeah.
It would have just been A Quiet Place with zombies, I guess, if they had it take place at night.
Yeah.
So it makes sense, but I suppose it's also good that the filmmakers didn't like screw up their own plot. They would have had a pretty massive plot hole if they hadn't have caught that early. So there's a logical reason for everything, I guess, but I still think it's a really cool creative choice. I'm still going to give them kudos, even though I've thought about it a little bit more, and it makes no sense for any of this film to be in the dark. But at the same time, it does make me interested to see, how people would have gotten along when it did get to nighttime and these zombies are kind of blind. I think that could have
Right.
also been interesting. Again, I haven't seen the quasi sequel, so maybe this is touched on there, but maybe that also could have been interesting. But I'm glad they did it as they did it. Like ultimately, when I think about it, just as a package, I don't think I'd change anything about anything in this movie. Like I gave it like a 4.5 on Letterboxd, which is basically my way of saying like my ratings are very easy. If I give something a 4.5, that means it's great and I will watch it again. But it's not like going to be in like my top 100 movies of all time or anything. Those are like my 5-star films get
Right.
that. But like 4.5 is like as close as you can get to masterpiece from me as humanly possible without being one. So there's literally nothing about this film I would change. I think everything's perfect. It's just a really well packaged, well put together, super polished, incredibly well written horror film that, if you're someone maybe you're someone who doesn't particularly like horror because you just hate dumb gore, which you're wrong. But also if that's you, or you have a partner who gets a bit squeamish during horror movies, they don't like when it gets dark, but you want to watch a horror movie with them, like Train to Busan, I think is perfect for that, because I think it just the emotional stuff just really, honestly, it's like just as important as the zombies. It's done just as well. So there's really nothing I would change about this movie.
But it also delivers on the gore. That's important to highlight too. It does really well
It
with that.
does, absolutely.
As as you were talking about what you would change, the only thing I was thinking, and I just for the record, I've this somewhere between a 4 and a 4.5. I think this last time I watched it, it was easily a 4.5. I think the only thing that somebody could possibly highlight is really negative. The CGI is kind of atrocious in this. There's a lot of scenes that are like, oh, that's very obviously just computer generated. And actually, that's kind of
Yeah,
true of the second film we're going to talk about as well. But
that's
even
definitely
then,
true of the
what's
second film.
what's crazy is, especially with this film compared to that second film, it didn't take away from it for me. And a lot of films that will take away from it. With this though, the drama, the tension, the acting in all of those scenes when they're moving around these what are likely, green screen, ping pong ball, whatever that they're doing, mocap stuff, it's not lessened in any way. All of the emotional beats still hit, all of the effects of the actual person, the person experiences that are happening for them, it still hits, and it's still something that I watch and go, damn. And even though that guy is not really a zombie running after the train in this climax, I can still feel the tension of this moment. Is they got to this point, they think that they're getting away from stuff, and they're not, because this whole land is overran with them at the moment. It's a lot.
For sure, absolutely. I suppose just on the zombies themselves, really, we kind of touched on this kind of fast zombies stuff that we saw after 28 Days Later, but I loved how the zombies were like how the actors did like some of the contortion that these actors did, when they were,
Yes.
flailing on the ground and falling around, running around and stuff. Like I'd wonder if they did like hire like gymnasts or something, because if that was like if the way they kind of flail around and stuff was that if that was CGI, it's really good CGI, but I didn't look like it was. For me, they must have hired people who were like just super flexible gymnasts, yoga people, because I've never really seen zombies move like that. We've seen fast zombies, sure, like zombies who are like will run
Right.
fast at you, but I've never seen zombies that kind of like contort as if they just don't have muscles and ligaments to have to abide by. They can just move in like any direction. They're like liquid almost. I thought it was really interesting and really scary because a lot of the time you can just like knock a zombie over and they'll be like struggling to get back up and stuff. But these guys like pop up like no problem at all, no matter what way you kind of twist them. So that kind of added to the scare factor almost because yeah, like I said, these are like they're kind of similar to the fast zombies, but I've never seen zombies act the way they do, just in terms of like the way their limbs contort and their spine moves around as they sort of get up to chase you. There's like nothing stopping their bloodlust. You can like knock them in half, and as long as their brain is still going, they're going to be chasing you down. Does not matter. They'll be like twisted up into a knot, and it does not matter. They will still try and chase you down, which is extra scary because like I'm a big fan of Shaun of the Dead. And Shaun of the Dead's obviously old school Romero style zombies. You bonk them on the head and you move on. You couldn't really do that to Busan zombies. You have to like I don't even know what you do to stop these guys. You have to like chop them up into pieces or something even to have a chance.
Yeah, and with these, I feel like it's a fast zombie, but with an added intensity, and because of that, it felt fresh and new. And again, like you said, no matter what you do, it's almost like you can't contain them. They can push through tight crevices because their body can move in ways that you're not expecting. They can run faster than you can possibly expect because it's not a human powering the body anymore. It's literally a virus, and this is the one that treats it. 28 Days Later is closest, but they're seemingly being powered by something inside and not just the human form anymore, which terrifying. That can't possibly be beat just one-on-one. You're screwed.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the start of the movie. Like, was it ever hinted at as to what caused the outbreak? Again, I'm just trying to remember the start. Because obviously normally in zombie movies, there's always something like, something escapes from a lab or whatever. Dirty bomb goes off.
Right.
I can't actually remember what started the zombies here. Was it ever explained? I don't remember.
The only thing I remember is the deer or whatever the creature was at the beginning that died in the road.
Yeah.
But even then, I think that there was some allusions to like they're going into a quarantined area, and then that deer was in there, and then it like vomited in a person's face or whatever.
Yeah, now that I think of it, there was something about a quarantine at the start. It was like whether it was like a nuclear or experimental place or whatever. Now that I recall, there was. I remember the deer. Now that you mention it, that's obviously some of the CGI that wasn't amazing that you mentioned earlier. Wasn't as bad for me as it was for you, I guess. But yeah, now that I think about it, that's probably something. But that's kind of cool as well that they didn't really tell you exactly, what's really causing this, because some films can definitely go overboard with trying to explain what caused the zombies. I'll point back to that terrible zombie movie we watched on the podcast a few months ago from that Italian guy who hates women. That was something to do with rats or something, eating sewage, something along those lines. Stupid explanation. I'd rather have none. So at least Busan did that right, I guess. Do you have any more thoughts, Ryan, on this film before we kind of wrap this segment up?
Well, one more big thing that I think we would be remiss if we did not mention. I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially considering you love this, on the fact that they are making an American remake of this.
Jeez Louise. Uh, what are my thoughts? Like, with every American remake of something, you're either going to get The Ring or The Grudge, where it's
Yep.
going to actually be pretty good and add something, or it's just going to be a rehash and of lower quality. Was it announced, like, is there anyone attached to it at least, or anything at all that we know about this American remake? That would definitely go a long way to help
It,
me have thoughts.
Here's the thing. Supposedly, this was going to be directed by Timo, that did The Night Comes for Us, that was on Netflix. He did some part of VHS 94 for Shudder. He's done a few
Okay.
things, and he knows action very well. Like The Night Comes for Us, very great action. However,
Okay.
it's an American remake, and as far as I remember, I believe the release date was supposed to have already been this year. It was supposed to have been in like March or April. So I don't know if it's indefinitely pushed. I don't know if it's canceled at this point. I've not seen any updates on this in a long time. It could have fallen in between the cracks and some of the studio stuff, and now we're in the middle of two strikes, and who knows?
Yeah, now that I'm just reading about it here. Yeah, it was supposedly going to be directed by Timo, as you mentioned, who I won't try and pronounce his surname like you didn't try. And it was also going to be co-produced by James Wan, which I suppose he knows horror. He's kind of your go-to guy to try and monetize your horror franchises. Apparently, as you said, it was supposed to be released in April this year. But it's apparently, as of now, been removed from the release schedule, and another film took its place in their release schedule, which was Evil Dead Rise, which I liked. So if we got Evil Dead Rise instead, then that's okay. I think that's a fair trade, because I know a lot of people didn't love Evil
Yeah.
Dead Rise, but I liked it, so I'm happy to trade that off.
I feel like Evil Dead Rise was a good movie, but a only subpar Evil Dead movie.
Which is completely fair. We had this. I had this discussion with Zach on one of the episodes recently. Whatever episode could came out closest to when the film came out, because we'd both seen it. We had a bit of a conversation
Right.
about it. But yeah, I totally get that. I suppose it's just so different when you take something out of its usual setting. Evil Dead, it's cabin in the woods. That's Evil Dead. When you take it to somewhere like completely different, you definitely run the risk of going Jason Takes Manhattan. Where it's so far away from the original product that even though you have all the pieces there, it's still not the same. There's like a key thing missing, which I get. I still had a fun time. I'm very easy to please, it seems, when it comes to movies. So, well, I suppose
It was a good theater
that remains
experience
to be
too.
seen. But yeah, I didn't get to see it in the theaters. I watched it on digital when it came out. I'd say it probably was fun in theaters. I suppose with Evil Dead, and again, I don't want to just to turn into an Evil Dead Rise episode. I suppose with Evil Dead Rise, because you don't have a central antagonist in the same way that you have like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees or Chucky or whatever. You can move it around as much as you want, because as long as there's deadites around, that's all that really matters. You could have this on a submarine, you could have
Yeah.
it in space, and it doesn't actually matter because you don't have to explain how they ended up there. You just have to explain how a book ended up there, which is a lot easier than trying to figure out how Michael Myers ended up on a cruise ship in the Bahamas. So I suppose I can understand why the filmmakers did it that way. Cool. So that was our discussion on Train to Busan. It was good to talk to Ryan about a film I'd never seen before and one that he had. But, we had some fun. I hope you enjoyed watching this. It's a video that we've never really brought you here on the channel before. Something that we might try and bring you in the future. We have talked about maybe doing sort of videos of the podcast that we might do. So we're going to have a chat with Chris and Zach about that maybe later on in the year. But if you want to see more of me and Ryan talking about sort of monster horror movies, as I said at the start of the video, over on Ryan's channel, there's going to be a video where we're going to talk about Bong Joon-ho's The Host. So the link for that will be in the description. Feel free to pop over there. If you don't follow Ryan already, you're crazy. Make sure you follow him on all the socials, on YouTube, blah, blah, blah. For now, we're going to wrap up here, and we'll see you over on Ryan's channel. Thanks.